The farmer handed over the injured horse for only $50, trying to hide his tears while everyone around whispered that he was getting rid of dead weight. But 6 months later, when the buyer came back and the horse recognized its former owner with a whinny that made the man tremble, no one could say a single word. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment where in the world you're watching from, because now I'm going to tell you everything. Spirit, looks like it's just you and me again today, Henry Thompson said, patting the spotted horse's neck. Margaret would have loved this sunrise. The early morning light spread across the hills of Oak Ridge, Vermont. Henry stood in the stable doorway watching as his 12-year-old Appaloosa horse munched on fresh hay. The farm had been quiet since Margaret died 3 years ago. Too quiet. Henry was 72 years old now. His hands, twisted from arthritis, gripped a wooden cane as he moved toward the feed bucket. Every morning for 50 years he had followed the same routine. Wake up at 4:30, make coffee, feed the animals. "Easy there, boy," Henry said as Spirit nudged him gently. "I know you're hungry. Patience." The horse had distinctive spotted markings across his white coat. A special heart-shaped patch marked his right side. Spirit wasn't just any horse. Henry had raised him from birth, watched him take his first steps, taught him everything he knew. Henry's phone rang in his pocket. With stiff fingers, he pulled out the old flip phone and pressed the green button. "Hello? Dad, it's Lisa. How are you doing up there?" His daughter's voice sounded far away, which it was, all the way from San Francisco. "I'm fine, just feeding Spirit." "You still have that old horse? Dad, at your age, should you really be taking care of a farm by yourself?" Henry sighed. "Been doing it most of my life. Don't see why I should stop now. Mom's been gone 3 years. We worry about you all alone." "I'm not alone. I've got Spirit." Henry watched as the horse lifted his head, ears perked forward as if he understood his name. "A horse isn't company, Dad. Have you thought any more about selling the farm? The retirement community near us has an opening. You could be close to the grandkids." Henry's grip tightened on the phone. "This is my home, Lisa. My father built this place. His father cleared this land. I'm not selling." The conversation ended the way it always did, with promises to call again soon and unspoken worries hanging in the air. Henry put the phone back in his pocket and looked at Spirit. "She means well," he told the horse. "They all do." After finishing the morning chores, Henry walked slowly back to the farmhouse. His hip ached from the cold. The big white house had needed paint for years. The red barn needed a new roof before winter arrived. Everything needed something, and there wasn't enough money for any of it. Inside, Henry made himself breakfast, 2 eggs and toast. He sat at the kitchen table and opened the pile of mail he'd been avoiding. "Property tax bill," he read aloud to the empty room. "Due October 15th. He checked the calendar on the wall. Today was September 27th. Less than 3 weeks to come up with $2,300. Henry opened his checkbook. The balance was $427, not nearly enough. His Social Security check would arrive next week, but after paying the electric bill and buying groceries, he'd still be short. The phone rang again. "Thompson Residence," Henry answered. "Mr. Thompson, this is Mark from Oak Ridge Bank. I'm calling about your mortgage payment." Henry closed his eyes. "I know it's late, Mark. I'll have it by Friday." "That's what you said last month, sir. We've been patient because of your history with the bank. But we need that payment. You'll get it, I promise." After hanging up, Henry looked at the framed photos on the wall. Margaret smiling on their wedding day, their 3 children when they were young, the farm in its better days when the fields were full of dairy cows and the barn was freshly painted. Outside, dark clouds gathered over the mountains. A storm was coming. Henry grabbed his raincoat and headed back to the barn to make sure Spirit would be comfortable. The horse whinnied when Henry entered, moving to the stall door to greet him. "Hey there, boy. Storm's coming in. Let's get you settled." Henry checked the roof for leaks and put extra hay in the stall. "Been through a lot together, haven't we?" Spirit pushed his nose against Henry's shoulder, his breath warm in the cool air. "You understand more than most people, don't you?" Henry stroked the horse's mane. "Don't know what I'd do without you." As rain began to tap on the roof, Henry sat on a bale of hay. His joints were especially painful today. Getting older wasn't easy, especially alone. His neighbor, Tom Carter, had offered to help around the farm, but Henry always refused. His pride wouldn't let him accept charity. Spirit made a soft nickering sound and moved closer to Henry. "I know what you want," Henry smiled, reaching into his pocket for the apple he'd saved. Spirit took it gently from his palm. Always had a sweet tooth, just like Margaret. The rain fell harder, drumming against the old barn roof. Henry spotted a new leak in the corner. "Another thing to fix," he muttered. "List keeps getting longer." That evening, Henry sat at his kitchen table with papers spread out before him. Farm insurance, electric bill, property taxes, mortgage statement. Each one demanded money he didn't have. He picked up a pencil and began making calculations. If he sold his old tractor, he might get enough for the property taxes. But then how would he plow the long driveway when snow came? The phone rang again. "Hello? Mr. Thompson, this is Dr. Sarah Collins, the veterinarian, just checking if Spirit is due for his shots this month." Henry looked at the calendar. "That's right, but can we push it back a bit? Things are tight right now." "I understand, but don't wait too long. Prevention is cheaper than treatment." After hanging up, Henry added veterinary costs to his list of expenses. Spirit needed his shots, new shoes, and winter supplements. The costs kept adding up. Henry made himself a simple dinner of soup and crackers. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the old clock that had belonged to his grandfather. He ate alone at the table where his family had once gathered for Sunday dinners and holiday meals. After dinner, despite the rain, Henry walked back to the barn to check on Spirit one last time. The horse was lying down in his stall but stood immediately when Henry entered. "Just making sure you're okay," Henry said. "Sleep well, old friend." Back in the house, Henry sat in his recliner and turned on the small television. The weather report predicted rain for the next 3 days, more water coming through that leaky barn roof. Before bed, Henry looked out the window toward the barn where Spirit slept. The horse was the last connection to his old life. The children had moved away years ago, building their own lives in California. Margaret was gone. Most of their friends had either died or moved to warmer states. One day at a time, Henry told himself as he climbed into bed. It was what Margaret always said when things got tough. That night, Henry dreamed of better days. The farm in summer, fields green and full of life, Margaret hanging laundry on the clothesline, children laughing as they ran through tall grass, Spirit as a young colt racing along the fence line with boundless energy. When morning came, Henry woke to his alarm at 4:30, just as he always did. His body ached as he pulled himself out of bed. Another day of work waited, regardless of pain or weather or money troubles. "Morning, Spirit," Henry called as he entered the barn an hour later. "Ready for another day?" The horse walked to the stall door and greeted Henry with a soft whicker. In the horse's brown eyes, Henry saw unconditional trust and friendship. As long as Spirit needed him, Henry had a reason to keep going. Outside, the rain had stopped. A thin ray of sunlight broke through the clouds, lighting up the wet fields. Henry opened Spirit's stall and led him outside for his morning exercise. "Nice day after all that rain," Henry said, watching as Spirit trotted around the paddock. The horse moved with grace, his spotted coat gleaming in the morning light. For a moment, Henry forgot about the bills, the leaky roof, his aching joints. All that mattered was this moment, the farm that had been his family's for generations, and the faithful horse who had become his closest companion. What Henry didn't know, as he watched Spirit gallop freely across the paddock, was that everything was about to change. The next morning brought dark clouds rolling over the hills of Oak Ridge. Henry woke to the sound of rain tapping against his bedroom window. He dressed quickly, pulling on his old rubber boots and raincoat before heading out to check on Spirit. "Going to be a muddy one today," Henry muttered to himself as he stepped onto the wet porch. The rain fell harder now, turning the dirt path to the barn into slick mud. Henry moved carefully, his arthritic knee protesting with each step. When he reached the barn, he found Spirit waiting patiently in his stall. "Morning, boy. Not much of a day for exercise, is it?" Henry opened the stall door and attached a lead rope to Spirit's halter. "Let's just get you out for a quick stretch while I clean your stall." Henry led Spirit to the small covered area beside the barn. The horse seemed eager to move, pulling slightly at the lead rope. "Easy now," Henry cautioned. "Ground's slippery today." While Henry gathered fresh straw for the stall, He kept one eye on Spirit, who paced restlessly in the small covered area. The horse clearly wanted his usual morning run despite the weather. "Just be patient," Henry called. "Rain might let up later." Henry turned his back for just a moment to grab a pitchfork. That's when he heard it, a startled whinny followed by the heavy thud of a large body hitting the ground. "Spirit!" Henry dropped the pitchfork and hurried outside. The horse lay on his side in the mud, struggling to rise. His right hind leg bent at an unnatural angle. Spirit made a noise Henry had never heard before, a high, pained sound that made Henry's heart race. "Don't move, boy, don't move." Henry rushed to Spirit's side, his own pain forgotten. He placed a gentle hand on the horse's neck. "Lie still now." Spirit's eyes were wide with fear and pain. He tried again to stand but collapsed back into the mud with a frightened cry. "It's going to be okay," Henry said, though he wasn't sure it was true. He pulled his phone from his pocket with shaking hands and dialed a number he knew by heart. After 3 rings, a woman answered. "Oak Ridge Veterinary Clinic. This is Dr. Collins." "Sarah, it's Henry Thompson. Spirit's hurt bad. He fell in the mud and his leg doesn't look right." "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Dr. Collins said. "Don't try to move him. Keep him calm and stay with him." The next 20 minutes felt like 20 hours to Henry. He sat in the mud beside Spirit, stroking the horse's neck and speaking softly. The rain soaked through his clothes, but he didn't move. "Help is coming," he repeated. "Just stay still, boy." When Dr. Collins finally arrived, her truck splashing through puddles as it pulled up to the barn, Henry felt a wave of relief. Sarah Collins was in her 40s with short brown hair tucked under a baseball cap. She had been the town's veterinarian for 15 years and had treated Spirit since he was born. "What happened?" she asked, kneeling beside the horse with her medical bag. "He slipped in the mud," Henry explained. "Went down hard on his right side. Can't stand up." Dr. Collins examined Spirit carefully, running her hands along the horse's leg. When she touched the injured area, Spirit flinched and tried to pull away. "We need to get him into the barn," she said. "I'll give him something for the pain first." After administering an injection, Dr. Collins and Henry waited for the medication to take effect. Then, with gentle coaxing and careful support, they managed to help Spirit hobble into the barn. The horse moved on 3 legs, keeping his injured leg raised off the ground. Inside the barn, Dr. Collins continued her examination while Henry watched anxiously. "It's bad, isn't it?" Henry asked, seeing the concern on the vet's face. Dr. Collins sighed and straightened up. "Let's talk outside for a moment, Henry." They stepped just outside at the stall door, where Spirit couldn't see their faces, but close enough to keep an eye on him. "His leg isn't broken, which is good news," Dr. Collins began. "But he has severely damaged the tendons and ligaments in that hind leg. There's significant swelling already. But you can fix it, right?" Henry asked. "Give him some medicine and bandage it up?" Dr. Collins shook her head. "This is beyond basic treatment, Henry. Spirit needs specialized surgery and then months of rehabilitation. He'll need physical therapy, special shoeing medication, whatever it takes," Henry said firmly. "Just tell me what to do." "Henry, doctor," Collins hesitated. "This kind of treatment is expensive, very expensive." "How expensive?" "The surgery alone would be around $5,000. With all the follow-up care and therapy, you're looking at $7,000 minimum." The number hit Henry like a physical blow. $7,000. He didn't have even $1,000 in his checking account. "There must be another option," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can give him pain medication and anti-inflammatories," Dr. Collins replied. "But without surgery, he'll never heal properly. He'll be in chronic pain. He won't be able to run again, maybe not even walk normally." Henry looked back at Spirit, who stood uncomfortably in his stall, head hanging low with pain. "And if he can't get the surgery?" Henry asked, though he feared he knew the answer. Dr. Collins placed a gentle hand on Henry's shoulder. "On a fixed income like yours, I know $7,000 is impossible. If you can't afford the treatment and don't want him to suffer." She paused. "Many owners in your situation would consider humane euthanasia." "Put him down?" Henry's voice cracked. "No, absolutely not." "I understand, Henry. I'm just laying out all the options." Dr. Collins opened her medical bag again. "I'll leave you with pain medication for the next week. Give him 1 tablet twice a day. Keep him confined in his stall, and call me if the swelling gets worse." After Dr. Collins left, Henry sat on a hay bale outside Spirit's stall, his head in his hands. The rain continued to drum on the barn roof. Spirit occasionally made soft sounds of pain that tore at Henry's heart. "What am I going to do?" Henry whispered. He was still sitting there an hour later when he heard the crunch of tires on his gravel driveway. Through the barn door, he saw his neighbor Tom Carter's truck pull up. Tom was 65, 10 years younger than Henry, and still ran the dairy farm next door. "Heard the vet was here," Tom said as he entered the barn, shaking rain from his jacket. "Everything okay?" Henry told him what happened to Spirit and about the $7,000 surgery they couldn't afford. "That's rough," Tom said, looking at the injured horse. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know," Henry admitted. "I can't put him down, Tom. I just can't." Tom was silent for a moment, watching as Henry gave Spirit a gentle pat. "Have you considered selling him?" Tom finally asked. "Selling Spirit? Who would buy an injured horse? There are people who rehabilitate horses, rich folks who can afford the vet bills. You could at least try to find him a good home." "He already has a good home," Henry said firmly. "I know that," Tom replied gently. "But what's better for Spirit? Staying here in pain or going somewhere he can get the care he needs?" Henry didn't answer. He couldn't imagine life without Spirit, but Tom's words made sense. What right did he have to keep Spirit if he couldn't give him proper care? "Think about it," Tom said, heading back toward the door. "Let me know if you need anything. Rebecca made extra stew last night if you want some dinner." "Thanks," Henry said, but he had no appetite. After Tom left, Henry spent another hour with Spirit, giving him his first dose of pain medication and making sure he had fresh water. The horse's eyes seemed to ask a question Henry couldn't answer. That night, Henry sat at his kitchen table with a pen and paper. His dinner, a sandwich, sat untouched beside him. With a heavy heart, he began to write. "For sale, 12-year-old Appaloosa gelding. Good temperament, well-trained. Injured leg needs medical attention. $500. Call Henry Thompson." His hand shook as he wrote the phone number at the bottom. $500 was far too little for a horse like Spirit, but Henry hoped the low price might attract someone quickly, someone who could afford to help him. The next morning, Henry drove to town through the continuing rain and placed the advertisement in the Oak Ridge Gazette. The woman at the front desk took his $20 for the week-long listing. "I hope you find a buyer," she said kindly. "Me too," Henry replied, though the words felt like a betrayal. For the next 5 days, Henry cared for Spirit as best he could. The horse remained in pain despite the medication. He ate little and spent most of his time standing uncomfortably in his stall, unable to lie down properly because of his injured leg. Henry's phone didn't ring once about the advertisement. On the 6th day, the rain finally stopped. Henry was in the barn changing the straw in Spirit's stall when he heard a vehicle coming up his driveway. Through the open barn door, he saw a battered blue pickup truck with a small horse trailer hitched to the back. A man stepped out of the truck and looked around before spotting Henry in the barn doorway. He was younger than Henry had expected, maybe in his mid-30s, with dark hair and a worn jacket. He walked with a slight limp as he approached. "Mr. Thompson?" the man called. "I'm Jack Miller. I saw your ad about the horse for sale." Henry felt a mix of hope and dread as he stepped forward to shake the stranger's hand. Someone had finally answered the advertisement. Someone who might be able to help Spirit. But that also meant saying goodbye to his best friend. "Come on in," Henry said, gesturing toward the barn. "Spirit's right in here." Jack Miller followed Henry into the barn, his boots leaving muddy prints on the concrete floor. He removed his baseball cap as he entered, revealing dark hair with a few strands of gray despite his young age. "Had the horse long?" Jack asked, his voice softer than his appearance suggested. 12 years, Henry replied. "Raised him from birth. His mother was my favorite mare." Jack nodded but said nothing more as they approached Spirit's stall. The horse raised his head when he heard them, ears forward with interest at the new visitor. "He's friendly," Henry said. "Good with people. Never kicked or bit anyone his whole life." Jack studied Spirit with careful eyes. The ad said he has an injured leg. Right hind. Happened 6 days ago in the mud. Vet says he tore some tendons. Jack moved slowly toward the stall door. Spirit watched him with cautious eyes but didn't back away. Mind if I take a closer look? Jack asked. Go ahead, Henry said, opening the stall door. He's on pain medicine, but still hurting pretty bad. Jack entered the stall with gentle movements. He spoke in a low, calm voice as he approached Spirit. Hey there, big guy. Not feeling too good, are you? Jack moved to Spirit's side, running a hand along his neck and shoulder before carefully working his way back toward the injured leg. Henry watched, impressed by how comfortable Spirit seemed with this stranger. The horse usually took time to warm up to new people. Easy now, Jack murmured as he bent to examine the injured leg. Just going to have a little look here. Spirit tensed, but allowed Jack to gently feel the swollen area. Jack's hands moved with practiced confidence, checking different parts of the leg and watching Spirit's reactions. Vet say anything specific about the injury? Jack asked without looking up. Damaged tendons and ligaments. Said he needs surgery and months of therapy. Would cost $7,000. Jack whistled softly. That's a lot of money. More than I have, Henry said simply. Jack straightened up and patted Spirit's neck. He looked into the horse's eyes for a long moment before turning back to Henry. He's in pain, Jack observed, but there's still a lot of spirit in those eyes. Henry nodded. He's tough. Always has been. Jack stepped out of the stall and closed the door behind him. He studied Spirit for another minute before turning to Henry. What made you decide to sell him? Henry swallowed hard. Don't want to, but I can't afford to fix him, and I can't stand seeing him suffer. Jack nodded slowly. Your ad said $500. That's right. Henry felt a spark of hope. Maybe this man had the means to help Spirit. Jack looked down at his boots for a moment, then back at Henry. I'm going to be honest with you, Mr. Thompson. I only have $50 right now. That's all I can offer. The words hit Henry like a physical blow. $50. Not even enough to pay this month's electric bill. Not even close to what Spirit was worth, even injured. 50? Henry repeated, unable to hide his disappointment. He's worth much more than that, even with the bad leg. I know, Jack agreed. In better days, a horse like this would be worth thousands. But with that injury, he shook his head. Most people would just put him down. The hard truth of those words hung in the air between them. Henry turned to look at Spirit, who stood awkwardly in his stall, favoring his injured leg. The horse had been in constant pain for nearly a week now. The medication helped, but not enough. What would you do with him? Henry asked. If I sold him to you? Jack's expression softened. I'd take care of him, Mr. Thompson. That's all I can promise right now. Henry turned away, blinking back tears. He'd hoped for so much more. Someone with deep pockets who could afford the surgery. Someone who would make Spirit good as new. I understand if you want to wait for a better offer, Jack said quietly. I just don't want you to get your hopes up. Not many people want to take on an injured horse these days. Henry knew Jack was right. 5 days with no other calls had proven that, and every day that passed, Spirit suffered more. Would you put him down? Henry asked bluntly, turning back to face Jack. Jack met his gaze steadily, not without trying to help him first. There was something in Jack's eyes that Henry trusted, a kindness maybe, or an understanding. This wasn't a man who saw horses as just animals. He seemed to recognize them as the thinking, feeling beings that they were. $50 it is, Henry said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. You sure? Jack asked. Henry nodded, not trusting himself to speak further. He walked over to Spirit's stall and rested his hand on the door. I'll go get the trailer ready, Jack said, seeming to understand Henry needed a moment alone. He walked out of the barn, his footsteps fading on the gravel outside. Henry opened the stall door and stepped inside. Spirit turned his head, pushing his nose gently against Henry's shoulder in familiar greeting. You're going away for a while, old friend, Henry said softly, stroking the horse's neck. This nice man is going to take care of you. Spirit's large brown eyes seemed to study Henry's face. Did he understand? Could he sense the pain in Henry's voice? I wish I could keep you. I wish I could fix your leg. Henry's voice broke. But I can't, and I can't let you keep hurting. Outside, Henry heard Jack lowering the ramp on his horse trailer. The mundane sounds of preparations for Spirit's departure made everything suddenly, terribly real. Henry pressed his forehead against Spirit's neck, feeling the warmth and familiar smell of the horse who had been his constant companion since Margaret died. Tears slid down his weathered cheeks. "Ready when you are, Mr. Thompson," Jack called from outside. Henry took a deep breath and attached Spirit's halter. "Let's go, boy." Leading Spirit from the stall was difficult. The horse moved slowly, limping heavily on his injured leg. Henry murmured encouragement with each painful step. Outside, the air felt cool and damp after the rain. Jack stood beside the open trailer, a look of genuine sympathy on his face. "Take your time," he said. "No rush." Henry guided Spirit toward the trailer ramp. The horse hesitated, sensing something important was happening. "It's okay, boy. Up you go." With gentle coaxing from both men, Spirit limped up the ramp and into the trailer. Jack secured him safely inside while Henry stood watching, his heart breaking with each passing second. Jack closed the trailer and turned to Henry. "Almost forgot," he said, pulling a worn wallet from his back pocket. He counted out 5 $10 bills and handed them to Henry. "50, like we agreed." Henry took the money mechanically, barely feeling the worn bills between his fingers. Such a small sum for something so precious. "Take good care of him," Henry said, his voice rough with emotion. "I will," Jack promised. He climbed into the truck and started the engine. Henry stood in his driveway as the truck and trailer turned slowly around. Through the trailer window, he could see Spirit looking back at him, ears forward, eyes questioning. "Goodbye," Henry whispered. The truck pulled away, tires crunching on gravel, then turned onto the main road. Henry watched until it disappeared around the bend, taking Spirit away from the only home he had ever known. The farm felt instantly empty. Henry stood motionless in the driveway, the $50 clutched in his hand, as the sound of the truck's engine faded into silence. Even the birds seemed quieter than usual. Slowly he walked back to the barn. Spirit's stall stood open and empty. His water bucket, feed bin, and the worn blanket he used in cold weather, all of the familiar items remained, but the horse was gone. Henry moved through the evening chores from pure habit. He closed the barn doors, checked that everything was secure, and walked back to the house. Inside, he placed the $50 on the kitchen table and sat down heavily in a chair. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silent room. Outside, the sky darkened as evening approached. Henry didn't turn on the lights. He sat in the growing darkness, alone with his thoughts. His mind kept returning to Spirit's face as the trailer pulled away, the confusion in those trusting eyes. Had Henry done the right thing? Or had he betrayed his faithful friend for a pittance because he was too poor, too old, too weak to find another solution? The telephone rang, startling Henry from his thoughts. He didn't answer it. After 4 rings, his ancient answering machine clicked on. "Dad, it's Lisa, just checking in. Call me when you can." Henry didn't move to pick up the phone or call back. What would he tell his daughter? That he'd sold Spirit for $50 to a stranger with a battered truck? That the farm felt like an empty shell without the horse's presence? Rain began to fall again, pattering against the windows. Henry finally stood and switched on a lamp. The sudden light made the kitchen look harsh and unfamiliar. He placed the $50 in an envelope and wrote "electric bill" on the front. At least the money would be useful for something. It wasn't enough to make a difference with the property taxes or mortgage, but it would keep the lights on for another month. Henry made himself a cup of coffee, though it was too late for caffeine. He wasn't planning to sleep much anyway. As he sipped the bitter liquid, he gazed out the window toward the dark outline of the barn. "I'm sorry, Spirit," he said to the empty room. "I hope wherever you are, you're not in pain anymore." Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing away the last of Spirit's hoofprints from the muddy driveway. The first snowfall of winter arrived in Oak Ridge 2 weeks after Spirit left. Henry woke to a world of white outside his window. 6 inches of fresh snow covered the farm, transforming the empty paddock where Spirit used to run into a blank canvas. Henry's morning routine had changed. No more early visits to the barn, no more gentle nickering greeting him, no more warm muzzle pushing against his shoulder. He made his coffee and looked out the kitchen window, watching snowflakes swirl in the gray morning light. The barn stood silent and empty. Henry had closed Spirit's stall door the day after Jack Miller drove away with him. He couldn't bear to see the empty space. "Just another day," Henry said to himself, his voice sounding strange in the quiet house. After breakfast, Henry put on his heaviest coat, gloves, and boots. The snow needed clearing from the driveway. Before, such a task would have been followed by checking on Spirit, making sure the horse had fresh water that wasn't frozen. Now there was no reason to visit the barn at all. The snow shovel felt heavier than Henry remembered from last year. His arthritic hands protested against the cold and the strain. Each scoop of snow sent pain shooting through his wrists and shoulders. Still, he continued until a path was cleared to the road. By the time Henry finished, sweat dampened his shirt despite the freezing temperature. His breath came in white puffs in the cold air. He leaned on the shovel, looking at the farm stretching before him. Without Spirit, the purpose of maintaining it all seemed less clear. More snow fell that week and the next. November turned into December, bringing shorter days and longer nights. The temperature dropped below 0 degrees. Henry's old furnace worked overtime, burning through expensive heating oil. One morning, the furnace stopped working entirely. Henry spent hours in the freezing basement, using his tools with stiff fingers until he managed a temporary repair. That night, he sat by the kitchen stove for warmth, remembering winters when Margaret was alive and the house felt cozy despite the weather outside. On December 20th, 4 days before Christmas, Henry checked his mailbox and found a letter from Oak Ridge Bank. He opened it at the kitchen table, already knowing what it would say. "Final notice," read the top of the letter. "Your mortgage payment is now 60 days overdue. If payment is not received by January 15th, foreclosure proceedings may begin." Henry placed the letter on top of the stack of other bills: property taxes, electric, heating oil. The $50 from Spirit had gone to the electric company weeks ago. His Social Security check barely covered food and medicine. The phone rang, breaking the silence. Henry picked it up. "Dad, it's David. Merry almost Christmas." "Hello, son." Henry tried to sound cheerful. "How are things in California?" "Warm and sunny," David laughed. "The kids are excited about Christmas. We're going to put up the tree tonight." "That's nice. Tell them Grandpa says hello." "I will." There was a pause. "How are you doing, Dad? Is it snowing there?" "Got about 2 feet on the ground now. More coming tomorrow, they say." "Must be hard to manage the farm in all that snow, especially alone." Henry knew where this conversation was heading. David had been suggesting he sell the farm for years. "I manage fine," Henry said. "Dad, I've been thinking," David continued. "There's a really nice retirement community near us, Palm Meadows. They have openings right now. A retirement home? I'm not ready for that." "It's not a home, Dad. It's a community. You'd have your own apartment. There are activities, people your age to talk to, and you'd be close to us and the grandkids." Henry looked around his kitchen, the same room where he'd eaten breakfast with Margaret for 45 years, where his children had done homework at the table, where generations of his family had gathered. "My place is here, David. This farm has been in our family for 3 generations. But you're all alone there, and you said yourself the farm doesn't make money anymore." "It's my home," David sighed. "At least think about it, Dad. We worry about you." After hanging up, Henry put on his coat and walked to the barn for the first time in weeks. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. The familiar smell of hay and wood hit him immediately. Everything was exactly as he'd left it, frozen in time. He approached Spirit's stall and opened the door. The empty space made his chest tighten. Henry picked up the horse's old brush from a shelf. He'd used it every day for 12 years to groom Spirit's spotted coat. "Wonder how you're doing, boy," Henry said to the empty stall. "Hope that fellow is taking good care of you." On Christmas morning, Henry woke to more snow and temperatures well below freezing. He made coffee and sat alone at the kitchen table. No presents waited under a tree. He hadn't bothered to put one up this year. His children called briefly from California, the conversation filled with forced cheer and carefully avoided subjects, like the farm, money problems, and Spirit. After the calls, Henry found an old photo album in the living room bookcase. He sat in his armchair and opened it, turning pages slowly until he found what he was looking for: pictures of Spirit as a foal, standing on wobbly legs beside his mother. Other photos showed the horse growing up, and many showed Henry and Spirit together over the years. "Merry Christmas, old friend," Henry said to the photos, "wherever you are." January brought even colder weather and more bills. The property tax notice arrived, marked second notice in red letters. Henry's checking account held exactly $78, not enough for even one of the bills piling up. One morning, Henry went into town for groceries and saw a sign in the window of Wilson's Hardware. Snow shoveler needed $10 per hour. Despite his arthritis, Henry went inside and spoke to Bill Wilson, who owned the store. "I can do it, Bill. Been shoveling snow all my life." Bill looked doubtful. "It's hard work, Henry. We get a lot of foot traffic here. Sidewalk needs clearing multiple times on snowy days." "I need the work," Henry said simply. Bill nodded. "Be here tomorrow at 7. We open at 8 and I need the sidewalk clear by then." For the next 3 weeks, Henry got up at 5:30 each morning, drove to town in his old truck, and shoveled snow for 2 hours before the store opened. His hands hurt so badly some days he could barely hold a fork at dinner, but the small paychecks helped buy groceries and keep the lights on. One evening after work, Henry stopped at the post office to mail his electric bill payment. Sarah Collins, the veterinarian, was there mailing packages. "Henry, how are you?" she asked. "I haven't seen you since..." She trailed off, not wanting to mention Spirit. "I'm getting by," Henry said. "How's business?" "Busy. Lots of animals get sick in this cold weather." Sarah hesitated. "Did you ever sell Spirit? I've been wondering." "Yes. A man came by. Bought him for $50. Sarah's eyes widened. "50? Henry, that's..." "It was all he had," Henry interrupted. "Seemed like a decent fellow. Said he'd take care of him." "I hope so," Sarah said gently. "For both your sakes." February brought a brief thaw, then more snow. Henry's truck broke down, leaving him to walk the 2 miles to town for work in the pre-dawn darkness. His neighbor Tom noticed one morning and pulled over in his pickup. "Need a ride, Henry?" "I can manage," Henry said. "Don't be stubborn. Get in." During the ride, Tom asked about the farm. "Bank's making noises about foreclosure," Henry admitted. "Can't keep up with the mortgage." "Sorry to hear that. What will you do?" "Keep working. What else can I do?" Tom was quiet for a moment. "Rebecca and I could help out with..." "No," Henry interrupted. "I appreciate it, but no." Tom didn't push further. He knew Henry's pride too well. The next day, Henry found a bag of groceries on his porch when he got home from work. There was no note, but he knew it came from Tom and Rebecca. Pride made him want to return it, but hunger made him take it inside. As February turned to March, the snow began to melt, revealing the muddy ground beneath. The paddock where Spirit had slipped and injured himself months ago was visible again. Henry avoided looking at it when he walked to the barn to check for winter damage to the roof. Inside the barn, Henry noticed Spirit's halter still hanging on a hook by the stall. He touched it gently, remembering how it had felt to lead Spirit away that rainy day, how the horse had looked back at him from Jack Miller's trailer. 6 months, Henry said to himself. Wonder if your leg healed up. That night, Henry dreamed of Spirit running in a green field, his spotted coat shining in sunshine, no sign of injury in his powerful stride. He woke feeling both comforted and sad, the emptiness of the farm pressing in around him. March brought slightly warmer temperatures but fierce winds that found every crack in the old farmhouse walls. Henry's arthritis grew worse from the damp cold. Some mornings his hands were so stiff he struggled to button his shirt. Still, he continued shoveling snow at Wilson's Hardware whenever it was needed. The small income wasn't enough to save the farm, but it kept immediate disaster at bay. One particularly windy afternoon in late March, Henry returned home to find his mailbox had blown off its post. As he bent to pick it up, pain shot through his back, leaving him breathless. He stood slowly, mailbox in hand, and looked up to see a vehicle turning into his driveway. It was a truck pulling a horse trailer, a newer, cleaner version of the rig Jack Miller had driven 6 months ago. Henry shielded his eyes against the late afternoon sun, trying to make out who was behind the wheel. The truck stopped and Jack Miller stepped out, looking different than Henry remembered. His clothes were newer, his hair trimmed neatly. He smiled as he approached. "Hello, Mr. Thompson," he called. "I brought someone to see you." Henry stared at Jack Miller with confusion. Someone to see him? He set the fallen mailbox against the fence post and stepped forward cautiously. "Mr. Miller?" Henry said. "Didn't expect to see you again." Jack smiled and gestured toward the trailer behind him. I made you a promise 6 months ago, Mr. Thompson. I said I'd take care of Spirit." At the mention of Spirit's name, Henry's heart jumped. He glanced at the horse trailer, noticing now how clean and shiny it was compared to the battered one Jack had used before. "Is he?" Henry couldn't finish the question. "Why don't you see for yourself?" Jack walked to the back of the trailer and unlatched the door. He lowered the ramp and stepped inside. Henry moved closer, his legs suddenly unsteady. He heard the familiar sound of hooves on metal flooring, then a soft whicker that he would know anywhere. Spirit stepped carefully down the ramp, his coat gleaming in the afternoon sun. He looked healthy and strong, his muscles well defined under his spotted hide. But what struck Henry most was the way Spirit moved, smoothly and confidently, with barely any sign of the injury that had once caused him such pain. When Spirit saw Henry, he raised his head high and made a sound, that special two-tone greeting he used only for Henry. The horse pawed the ground excitedly and pulled against the lead rope Jack was holding. "Easy, boy," Jack laughed. "He remembers you." Henry stood frozen, unable to believe what he was seeing. 6 months ago, Spirit had been in terrible pain, barely able to walk. Now he looked better than ever. "His leg," Henry said. "It's completely healed?" Jack nodded. "Good as new." "Well, maybe he feels it a little in cold weather, but nothing serious." Spirit pulled forward again, clearly impatient to reach Henry. Jack released the lead rope and the horse trotted the short distance to his old owner. Henry's hands trembled as he reached out to touch Spirit's neck. The horse immediately pushed his nose against Henry's shoulder, just as he always used to do. The familiar warmth and smell brought tears to Henry's eyes. "Hey, boy," Henry whispered, his voice breaking. "Hey there. I missed you too." Spirit nickered softly and stayed close, seeming to understand everything. Henry ran his hands over the horse's neck and shoulders, checking him over. Spirit's coat was sleek and well-groomed, his mane neatly trimmed. He looked like he had been given the best of care. "How did you do it?" Henry asked, looking up at Jack. "His leg was so badly damaged." "Surgery first," Jack explained. "Then months of careful rehabilitation, special exercises, water therapy, proper nutrition." He paused. "I should have been honest with you from the start, Mr. Thompson. I'm actually a veterinary specialist who focuses on horse rehabilitation." Henry looked up in surprise. "A vet? You never said—" "I know," Jack interrupted, "and I apologize for that. People usually charge more when they know what I do for a living. I wanted to help Spirit, but I only had $50 to my name that day." Henry continued stroking Spirit's neck, trying to make sense of it all. "But the surgery, the treatment, it must have cost thousands." Jack nodded. "It did. I had some savings I was planning to use for something else. But when I saw Spirit that day, I knew he was special, worth saving." Spirit moved restlessly, wanting to explore his old home. Henry walked with him toward the paddock, and Jack followed. The horse seemed eager to visit his familiar surroundings. "I don't understand," Henry said as they walked. "Why would you spend so much on a horse you just met? And why bring him back here?" Jack smiled. "2 reasons. First, I keep my promises. I told you I'd take care of him." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. "And second, Spirit earned his keep." Henry took the envelope Jack offered. Inside was a stack of cash. $2,000, Jack explained. "Spirit's been busy the past few months. Once he recovered, I entered him in some small races at county fairs. He won 3 of them. That's his prize money. It rightfully belongs to you." Henry stared at the money in disbelief. $2,000, enough to pay his overdue mortgage and part of his property taxes. "I can't accept this," Henry said automatically. "You can and you should," Jack insisted. "He's your horse. I was just borrowing him." Spirit had walked ahead and now stood by the gate to his old paddock. He looked back at the 2 men expectantly. "He wants to run," Jack said. "Mind if I let him into the paddock?" Henry nodded, still stunned by everything happening. Jack opened the gate and Spirit trotted in, immediately breaking into a smooth canter around the perimeter. His movements were fluid and powerful, showing no sign of his previous injury. "Look at him go," Henry whispered, watching as Spirit ran freely across the muddy spring ground. 6 months ago, he could barely stand. Jack leaned against the fence beside Henry. "He's a fighter. Never gave up, even when the therapy was painful. Some horses would have quit, but not Spirit." They watched in silence as Spirit galloped around the paddock, occasionally stopping to investigate a familiar spot or sniff the fresh spring grass beginning to grow. "I never thought I'd see him run again," Henry said, his voice thick with emotion. "There's something else I wanted to talk to you about, Mr. Thompson," Jack said. "I've recently purchased the old Johnson property next door to your farm." Henry turned to him in surprise. The Johnson farm had been empty for years, ever since old Pete Johnson died and his children moved away. "What are you planning to do with it?" Henry asked. "Turn it into a horse rehabilitation center," Jack explained. "A place where injured horses can come for treatment and recovery. The kind of place that could have helped Spirit if it had existed 6 months ago." Henry nodded slowly. "Sounds like a good idea." "I need help though," Jack continued. "Someone who understands horses, who has experience working with them, someone they trust." He looked directly at Henry. "I'd like to offer you a job, Mr. Thompson, working with me at the center." Henry blinked in surprise. "A job? At my age?" "Age doesn't matter. Experience does, and you have more of that than anyone I know." Jack gestured towards Spirit. "Look how he responds to you, even after 6 months apart. That kind of connection is rare." Henry watched as Spirit trotted over to the fence where they stood. The horse pushed his nose through the railings, seeking Henry's touch. "The pay would be fair," Jack continued, "and you'd get to see Spirit every day." Henry stroked Spirit's forehead, considering Jack's words: a job, income, purpose, and Spirit back in his life. "Why are you doing all this?" Henry asked. Jack was quiet for a moment before answering. 6 months ago, I saw 2 beings who needed help. You and Spirit. I could only help one of you then. Now I can help both." Henry looked at the envelope of money in his hand, then at Spirit, and finally at Jack. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Jack suggested with a smile. "We can start next week." Henry felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. With the prize money, he could catch up on his bills. With a job, he could keep the farm. And with Spirit back, the emptiness of the past 6 months could start to heal. "Yes," Henry said finally. "I'll help you." Spirit nickered softly, as if approving the decision. "There's more I should tell you," Jack said, his expression becoming more serious. "About why I understand what it means to lose something important." Jack rolled up his left sleeve to reveal a long surgical scar running from his wrist to his elbow. "I used to be an equestrian competitor, Olympic level. Then a bad fall shattered my arm in 12 places." Henry nodded, understanding dawning. "That's why you walk with a slight limp." "Broke my leg too," Jack confirmed. "My riding career was over. My fiancée left during my recovery. Said she'd signed up to marry a champion, not a cripple." "I'm sorry," Henry said. Jack shrugged. "It was years ago, but it taught me something important. Sometimes what looks like the end is actually a beginning." After I healed, I went back to school, became a veterinarian, started specializing in helping horses everyone else gave up on. Spirit had moved away to explore another part of the paddock, his tail held high as he trotted confidently across the ground. "Like Spirit," Henry said. "Exactly like Spirit," Jack agreed. "Most vets would have recommended putting him down. The surgery and rehabilitation were expensive and risky, but I've been where he was, injured, in pain, written off." Henry understood now why Jack had taken Spirit, why he'd spent thousands of his own money to heal a horse he'd just met. "Thank you," Henry said simply, "for believing in him when I couldn't do anything to help." "You did help," Jack replied. "You raised him well. You gave him strength and trust. That's why he recovered so quickly. He had something to live for, someone to come back to." They watched Spirit run one more big circle around the paddock before slowing to a walk. The horse looked content, at home in his familiar surroundings. "I should get him settled in the barn," Henry said. "If he's staying." "He's staying," Jack confirmed. "He belongs here." He handed Henry the lead rope. "I'll come by tomorrow morning. We can talk more about the rehabilitation center and your job." As Jack had turned to leave, Henry called after him. "Why did you really come back? You could have kept Spirit. I would never have known the difference." Jack looked back over his shoulder. "Because some promises are worth keeping, Mr. Thompson, and some horses belong with the people who love them." Jack climbed into his truck and drove away. leaving Henry standing with Spirit and the envelope containing $2,000. Enough money to save his farm, at least for now. "Come on, boy," Henry said to Spirit. "Let's get you home." He opened the paddock gate and led Spirit toward the barn. The horse walked beside him perfectly in step, as if they had never been separated. For the first time in 6 months, the farm didn't feel empty anymore. The next morning, Henry woke before sunrise, just as he had for decades. But today felt different. Today, he had a reason to hurry through his breakfast. Spirit was back in his stall, and Jack Miller would be arriving to discuss their new partnership. Henry walked to the barn with a spring in his step despite his arthritic knee. When he opened the door, Spirit greeted him with a soft, nickering sound. The horse stood tall in his freshly bedded stall, looking at Henry with bright eyes. "Morning, boy," Henry said, reaching out to stroke Spirit's neck. "Hungry?" As Henry filled the feed bucket with grain, he heard a truck pull into the driveway. Through the barn door, he saw Jack getting out of his vehicle. Jack was dressed in work clothes and carried a large paper tube under his arm. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson," Jack called as he entered the barn. "How's our patient doing today?" "Just fine," Henry replied. "And please call me Henry. Mr. Thompson makes me feel older than I already am." Jack laughed. "Henry it is then. And how did you sleep?" "Better than I have in months," Henry admitted. "Having Spirit back, it means everything." Jack nodded in understanding. "I brought some plans to show you." He gestured to the paper tube. "For the rehabilitation center." They moved to a small wooden table in the corner of the barn that Henry used for mixing medicines and keeping records. Jack unrolled a large blueprint and secured the corners with tools from Henry's workbench. "Here's what I'm thinking," Jack said, pointing to different areas of the drawing. "The Johnson property has that big open field that gets good sunlight. Perfect for a training arena. The old barn needs work, but the structure is solid. We can convert it into rehabilitation stalls with special padding and support systems." Henry leaned over the plans, taking in the details. "What's this area here?" he asked, pointing to a large rectangular section. "A water therapy pool," Jack explained. "Horses can exercise in water without putting weight on injured limbs. It's how I helped Spirit rebuild his strength without stressing his healing tendons." Henry's eyebrows rose. "Sounds expensive." "It is," Jack admitted, "but I've been saving for this for years. I've also got a small business loan from the bank. The real challenge isn't money. It's finding people with the right experience and patience." "And that's where I come in?" Henry asked. "Exactly. You know horses better than anyone I've met. They trust you. That's something money can't buy." After reviewing the plans, Jack suggested they walk over to the Johnson property to assess what needed to be done first. Spirit watched them from his paddock as they crossed the field that separated the two farms. The Johnson farm had been empty for 3 years. The white farmhouse had peeling paint, and the roof was missing several shingles. The large red barn stood sturdy but weathered, its doors hanging slightly askew on rusted hinges. "Needs some work," Henry observed as they approached. "That's putting it mildly," Jack agreed. "But it has good bones, as they say." Inside the Johnson barn, sunlight streamed through gaps in the wooden walls. The space was huge, much larger than Henry's barn, with high ceilings and a solid concrete floor. "I was thinking we'd start by cleaning this place out," Jack said, gesturing to the accumulated junk of years, old farm equipment, broken furniture, and piles of moldy hay. "Then repair the roof and walls before building the specialized stalls." Henry walked the length of the barn, mentally noting what needed fixing. The support beams look good, floor's solid. Roof needs work, but not a complete replacement. "So you think it's possible?" Jack asked. "To turn this into a rehabilitation center?" Henry nodded slowly. "With enough hard work, yes. How soon do you want to start?" "Today, if you're up for it," Jack said. "I've got basic tools in my truck. Thought we could at least begin clearing out the junk." And so they began. Despite his arthritis, Henry worked alongside Jack, sorting through years of accumulated items. Some things were salvageable, old tack that could be cleaned and repaired, wooden feed bins that needed only minor fixes. Other things were beyond saving and went into a growing pile of trash. By midday, they had cleared a significant portion of the barn floor. Jack insisted they take a break, and they sat on wooden crates eating sandwiches Jack had brought. "Tell me more about your plan for this place," Henry said between bites. "How many horses do you think you can help at once?" To start, maybe 4 or 5, Jack replied. Quality care is more important than quantity. Each horse will need individualized treatment and attention. And you think people will bring their horses all the way out of here to Oak Ridge? Jack nodded. Word travels in the horse community. When people hear about successful rehabilitations like Spirit's, they'll come. There aren't many specialized centers like this in Vermont. As they talked, Henry began to see Jack's vision more clearly. This wasn't just a business venture. It was a mission. Jack truly cared about helping injured horses that others might give up on. What made you decide on the Johnson place? Henry asked. There must be farms for sale closer to the city with better access for clients. Jack looked directly at Henry. I chose it because it's next to your farm. I saw how you cared for Spirit even when you couldn't afford it to help him. I figured any community that produced someone like you must be a good place to build something that matters. Henry felt a warm glow of pride at Jack's words. For years, he'd felt increasingly useless, an old man struggling to maintain a failing farm. Now, suddenly, his lifetime of experience had value again. After lunch, they returned to work with renewed energy. By late afternoon, they had cleared almost half the barn and identified the most urgent repairs needed. That's enough for one day, Jack said, noticing Henry rubbing his sore hands. Rome wasn't built in a day. Never been to Rome, Henry said with a small smile, but I reckon even they had to start somewhere. As they walked back toward Henry's farm, Jack outlined his timeline. I'm thinking we can get the barn repairs done in about a month, then another month for building the specialized stalls and equipment. If all goes well, we could be ready for our first patients by early summer. Sounds ambitious, Henry said. It is. That's why I need a partner who knows what he's doing. Jack extended his hand. So are we officially partners in this venture? Henry looked at Jack's outstretched hand. 6 months ago, he had been at his lowest point, about to lose his farm, forced to sell Spirit for a pittance. Now he was being offered not just a job, but a partnership, a purpose. Partners, Henry agreed, shaking Jack's hand firmly. When they reached Henry's barn, Spirit greeted them with a cheerful whicker. Jack checked the horse's previously injured leg, feeling carefully along the tendons. Perfect, he pronounced. No heat, no swelling. He's fully recovered. Will he be the first resident of the new center? Henry asked. Jack shook his head. Spirit's already done his time in rehabilitation. He's earned his retirement. He'll be more valuable as a therapy horse, helping nervous or traumatized horses adjust to treatment. He has a remarkable ability to calm other animals. Just like his mother, Henry said. Daisy could settle a nervous horse faster than any human. Before leaving for the day, Jack and Henry sat on Henry's porch, finalizing details of their arrangement. Jack would pay Henry a weekly salary for his work on the rehabilitation center. Additionally, Henry would receive a percentage of the center's profits once it opened. One more thing, Jack said as he prepared to leave. I was thinking we should have a name for this place. Any ideas? Henry thought for a moment, looking out at the field where Spirit was grazing peacefully in the evening light. How about Spirit's Haven? He suggested. Since he's the reason we met. Jack smiled broadly. Spirit's Haven Equine Rehabilitation Center. I like it. Over the next few weeks, Henry and Jack settled into a routine. Each morning, they would meet at Henry's farm, check on Spirit, then head over to the Johnson property to work. Gradually, the old barn transformed. They repaired the roof, replaced broken boards in the walls, and installed new doors that swung smoothly on heavy hinges. Word spread quickly through Oak Ridge about the rehabilitation center. Neighbors stopped by to see what was happening. Some, like Tom Carter, offered to help with the heavy work. Others brought food or tools to lend. One afternoon, Sarah Collins, the veterinarian, visited to see their progress. This is impressive, she said, walking through the partially renovated barn. I have at least 3 clients who could use your services right now. When do you think you'll be ready for patients? Another month or so, Jack replied. We still need to build the specialized stalls and install the water therapy equipment. Sarah turned to Henry. I have to admit, I was worried about you this winter, Henry. After you sold Spirit, well, you seemed lost. It's good to see you with a purpose again. Henry nodded, uncomfortable with the personal observation, but knowing it was true. Life takes unexpected turns, he said simply. As April arrived, bringing warmer weather and new growth to the fields, The rehabilitation center began to take real shape. The specialized equipment Jack had ordered arrived on large trucks: the water therapy tank, custom-built stall dividers with padded walls, mechanical walkers for controlled exercise. Henry watched with amazement as the empty barn transformed into a modern rehabilitation facility. Jack knew exactly what was needed for each type of injury a horse might suffer. His knowledge impressed Henry more each day. "How do you know all this?" Henry asked one day as they installed the complex water therapy system. Jack smiled. "Years of study and experience. After my own accident, I became obsessed with rehabilitation techniques. What works, what doesn't, how to minimize pain while maximizing recovery. I just applied that knowledge to horses instead of people." By the end of April, Spirits Haven was nearly ready for its first patients. The barn gleamed with new paint. 10 specialized rehabilitation stalls lined one wall, each equipped with monitoring systems and adjustable supports. The water therapy pool dominated the center of the building, its surface reflecting the new skylights above. Standing in the finished barn, Henry felt a sense of accomplishment he hadn't experienced in years. "We did it," he said quietly. "We sure did," Jack agreed, "and just in time. I got 3 calls yesterday from horse owners interested in our services. Word is spreading." Henry looked around at what they had created together. 6 months ago, he had been on the verge of losing everything. Now, he had Spirit back, a steady income, and a purpose that used his lifetime of experience with horses. "Ready for this new chapter?" Jack asked, seeming to read Henry's thoughts. "More than ready," Henry replied. "Let's help some horses." The first week of May brought 3 new horses to Spirits Haven. The first to arrive was a chestnut mare named Ruby with an injured shoulder. Then came a black gelding called Midnight who had damaged his front leg in a trailer accident. The third was a young bay horse named Copper, barely 3 years old, who had fallen into a ditch and hurt his back. Henry watched with pride as Jack examined each horse and created a treatment plan. Spirit seemed to understand his new role too. He stayed calm and friendly in his paddock next to the rehabilitation barn, greeting each new arrival with gentle curiosity. "Spirit helps them relax," Jack observed as they watched Copper settling into his new stall. "They sense he's been through rehabilitation himself." "He's always been good with other horses," Henry agreed. Their days fell into a busy routine. Mornings began with feeding and medications, followed by individual therapy sessions for each horse. Afternoons were for water therapy and gentle exercise. By evening, Henry was tired but satisfied with the work they were doing. One Wednesday morning, Henry was leading Ruby through her walking exercises when he noticed a shiny black car driving slowly up the gravel road toward the center. The car was expensive, much fancier than any vehicle normally seen in Oak Ridge. It parked near the barn and a man in a dark suit stepped out. "Can I help you?" Henry called, still holding Ruby's lead rope. The man smiled and approached, his polished shoes looking out of place in the barnyard. He appeared to be in his 40s, with perfectly combed hair and a gold watch that caught the sunlight. "Good morning," the man said. "I'm looking for the owner of this property." "That would be me," Jack said, emerging from the barn behind Henry. "Jack Miller. This is my colleague, Henry Thompson." The man extended his hand. "Richard Taylor, from Westland Enterprises. I was hoping to speak with you about a business opportunity." Jack glanced at Henry, then back to Taylor. "I'm in the middle of treatments right now. Can you wait about 15 minutes? "Of course," Taylor replied smoothly. "Take your time." While Jack finished Ruby's therapy session, Henry showed Taylor to the small office they had set up near the entrance. Taylor walked around, examining the certificates on the wall and the photos of horses they had begun to display. "Impressive facility," Taylor commented. "Very rustic." Henry wasn't sure if that was a compliment, so he simply nodded and offered Taylor a chair. When Jack joined them, Taylor opened a leather briefcase and removed several glossy folders. "Gentlemen, I represent Westland Enterprises, a development company based in Boston. We're planning an exciting new project here in Oak Ridge, a luxury resort and golf course that will bring jobs and economic growth to the area." He slid the folders across the desk. Inside were colorful pictures of buildings with fancy restaurants, swimming pools, and people playing golf on green grass. "Looks expensive," Henry commented. Taylor laughed. "It's a $300 million investment. The Mountain Pines Resort will be Vermont's premier vacation destination. What does this have to do with us? Jack asked. Taylor leaned forward. We've been purchasing land in the area for our development. The Johnson property, this property, and the Thompson farm next door sit right in the middle of our planned golf course. Henry felt a chill. You want to buy our farms? Exactly, Taylor smiled. And we're prepared to be very generous. Westland Enterprises is offering 3 times the market value for both properties. Jack closed the folder. I just bought this land, Mr. Taylor. I'm not interested in selling. I understand your reluctance, Taylor said, still smiling. But consider the numbers. He wrote a figure on a notepad and pushed it toward Jack. That's our offer for the Johnson property. Jack glanced at the number without changing his expression. Taylor wrote another number and showed it to Henry. And that's our offer for the Thompson farm. Henry stared at the number. It was more money than he had ever seen, enough to pay off his mortgage and live comfortably for the rest of his life. What about our horses? Henry asked. And the rehabilitation center we just built? You could relocate to a new facility, Taylor suggested. With the money we're offering, you could build something twice this size somewhere else. Henry looked at Jack, who remained silent. We'll need to think about it, Henry said finally. Of course. Taylor stood and handed them each a business card. Call me when you've made a decision. But don't wait too long. Most of your neighbors have already agreed to sell. After Taylor left in his shiny black car, Henry and Jack walked outside. The spring air was warm, and from the paddock, Spirit watched them with curious eyes. That's a lot of money, Henry said quietly. Jack nodded. It is, but this place isn't about money. We just built something special here, something that matters. My farm has been in my family for generations, Henry added. I couldn't sell it no matter the price. Then we're agreed? Jack asked. We turned down Westland's offer? Henry nodded. Agreed. This is our home. 2 days later, Henry drove into town for supplies and stopped at Miller's General Store. Inside, he found several of his neighbors talking in hushed tones. Henry, called Bill Parker, who owned the farm a mile down the road. Did that fellow from Westland talk to you yet? He did, Henry confirmed. We sold, Bill admitted. Got too good a deal to pass up. Sarah and I are moving to Florida next month. Henry looked around the store and realized that nearly everyone was talking about Westland's offers. The Wilsons sold too, someone else said. And the Johnsons. Pretty soon, half the town will be owned by that resort company. On his way home, Henry noticed new survey markers along the roadside. Bright orange stakes with Westland's logo dotted the landscape. Construction equipment had already arrived on the old Davis farm, the first property Westland had purchased. When Henry told Jack what he'd heard in town, Jack frowned. I don't like it, Jack said. This resort will change everything about Oak Ridge. That night, Henry called his son David to tell him about the offer on the farm. That's amazing, Dad, David exclaimed. With that kind of money, you could move out here to California, buy a nice place near us. I'm not selling, Henry said firmly. What? Dad, be reasonable. That farm is falling apart. You've struggled for years to keep it going. Now someone wants to give you a fortune for it. It's not about the money, David. This land means something. And now with Jack's rehabilitation center, we're doing important work here. David sighed. Just promise me you'll think about it. This might be your only chance to secure your future. The next morning, Henry woke to the sound of Spirit making distressed noises in the paddock. He hurried outside and found the fence cut in 3 places. Spirit was still safely inside, but pacing nervously near the damaged sections. What happened? Jack asked, arriving moments later. Someone cut my fence during the night, Henry said, examining the clean cuts in the wire. They repaired the fence together, both men quiet as they worked. This wasn't random vandalism. The cuts were precise and clearly intentional. 3 days later, Jack discovered that someone had poured sugar into the gas tank of his tractor, ruining the engine. The same week, Henry found his mailbox smashed flat. Then the phone calls started. Always late at night, always the same message. Take the money while you still can. The caller never identified himself, and the number was always blocked. It's Westland, Henry said after the 3rd such call. They're trying to scare us into selling. Jack nodded grimly. We're the only holdouts now. Everyone else along this road has sold to them. More troubling signs appeared. Henry noticed that the creek running through his property seemed to have less water each day. By the end of May, what had once been a flowing stream was barely a trickle. "Something's wrong with the water," Henry told Jack one morning. "The creek's nearly dry." They followed the creek upstream, walking for almost 2 miles through neighboring properties now owned by Westland. Near the old Wilson place, they discovered the problem. A newly built earthen dam blocked the creek, diverting water into large holding tanks marked with Westland's logo. "They're stealing our water," Jack said, examining the construction. "This is illegal. Without that creek, we can't water the horses properly," Henry worried, "and my hayfield will dry up." When they returned to the rehabilitation center, they found Richard Taylor waiting for them. "Gentlemen," Taylor said, his smile now looking predatory rather than friendly, "I was just checking if you'd reconsidered our offer." "We found your dam," Jack said bluntly. "You're illegally diverting water from downstream farms." Taylor's smile didn't waver. "That water is on Westland property now. We have permits for water management. Not for blocking a natural waterway," Henry argued. "That creek serves every farm downstream." Taylor shrugged. "Permits, paperwork, these things get sorted out eventually. In the meantime, I notice your fields are looking rather dry. Must be difficult to run a horse facility without adequate water." The threat was clear. "You cut my fence," Henry said, "and damaged Jack's tractor." "I have no idea what you're talking about," Taylor replied. "But farming can be dangerous work. Accidents happen, equipment breaks down, animals escape." He glanced meaningfully toward Spirit in the paddock. "Are you threatening us?" Jack stepped forward, anger clear in his voice. "Not at all," Taylor said smoothly. "I'm simply pointing out that holding out against progress can be difficult, stressful, sometimes even costly." He turned to leave, then paused. "My offer remains open for 1 more week. After that, Westland will need to pursue other options for that land." After Taylor drove away, Henry and Jack looked at each other. "This is getting dangerous," Jack said. "They're playing dirty." "What can we do?" Henry asked. "We can't fight a company with that much money and power." Jack was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Maybe not directly," he finally said. "But if they're breaking the law with that dam, there must be other corners they're cutting. We need to find out exactly what Westland is up to." "How do we do that?" Henry asked. "I have a friend," Jack replied. "A reporter for the Burlington Herald, Lisa Chen. She specializes in environmental stories." He pulled out his phone. "If Westland is breaking the law, Lisa will help us prove it." That evening, as they watched the sun set over the increasingly dry fields of Henry's farm, Jack made a promise. "We won't let them win, Henry. This land means too much to give up without a fight." In the paddock, Spirit watched them attentively, as if he understood every word. Lisa Chen arrived in Oak Ridge 2 days later. She parked her small blue car in front of Henry's farmhouse and stepped out carrying a leather bag full of equipment. Henry noticed right away that she didn't look like most reporters he had seen on television. She was younger than he expected, maybe in her early 30s, dressed in hiking boots, jeans, and a simple button-up shirt with the sleeves rolled to her elbows. "You must be Henry Thompson," she said, extending her hand. "Jack has told me so much about you, and this must be the famous Spirit." She gestured toward the paddock, where Spirit watched them curiously. "That's him," Henry confirmed, shaking her hand. "Jack's over at the rehabilitation center checking on our patients. I can take you there." As they walked, Lisa asked Henry about his farm and family history. She took notes in a small pad, nodding thoughtfully at his answers. "So your family has owned this land for 3 generations?" she asked. "That's right. My grandfather built that house. My father expanded the barn. I've been here my whole life, except for my time in Vietnam." Jack met them at the rehabilitation center, where he was finishing a therapy session with Midnight, the black gelding. "Lisa, thanks for coming," Jack said, securing Midnight in his stall before joining them. "When you told me what's happening here, I had to see for myself," Lisa replied. "Westland Enterprises has a reputation for aggressive development, but what you described goes beyond that." Jack led them to the office and spread out a map of the area on the desk. "This is our land," he said, pointing to their 2 connected properties. "Westland has bought everything around us, marked in red. They're planning a golf course that would cut right through where we're standing. Lisa studied the map. And you said they've built a dam? Here, Henry pointed to a spot upstream. It's blocking the creek that runs through both our properties. Our fields are already drying up. They've also damaged our fences, sabotaged equipment, and made threatening phone calls, Jack added. Lisa's expression grew serious. Those are serious accusations. Do you have any proof? Not for the vandalism, Jack admitted. But the dam is definitely illegal. We saw it ourselves. Then that's where we start, Lisa said decisively. Show me this dam. I need photos, water samples, and GPS coordinates. That afternoon, the three of them hiked upstream along the nearly dry creek bed. Henry brought along a backpack with water bottles and Lisa's sampling equipment. The day was warm, and the walk was difficult for Henry, but he refused to stay behind. There it is, Jack said as they approached a curve in the creek. The dam was larger than it had been during their last visit. Fresh dirt had been piled higher, completely blocking the natural flow of water. Large plastic pipes diverted the creek into a series of holding tanks behind a chain-link fence marked with Westland Enterprises private property signs. This is worse than you described, Lisa said, pulling a camera from her bag. She began taking photos of the dam and the diverted water. This is a clear violation of Vermont water rights laws. As Lisa documented the dam, Henry noticed something else troubling. Look at those barrels, he said, pointing to a row of large blue containers behind the fence. Those weren't here before. Lisa zoomed in with her camera. Hazardous waste symbols, she noted. They're storing chemicals right next to a water source. She took more photos, then climbed carefully down to the creek bed to collect water samples in small vials. I'll have these tested, she explained. If they're dumping chemicals, it will show up in the analysis. As Lisa finished collecting samples, they heard the sound of an engine approaching. A white truck with the Westland logo appeared on the dirt road leading to the dam. Someone's coming, Jack warned. We should go. Wait, Lisa said, quickly taking a few more photos. I need to document those chemical barrels. Two men in Westland security uniforms stepped out of the truck. One was tall and heavy-set, the other shorter but muscular. Both wore sunglasses despite the tree cover. Hey, you're trespassing on private property, the taller guard called, walking toward them. The creek is public access, Lisa replied calmly, continuing to take photos. Not anymore, the guard said, reaching for her camera. This is Westland property now. Hand over that camera. Jack stepped between Lisa and the guard. We're leaving. No need for trouble. The second guard approached Henry. Aren't you the old man who won't sell his farm? Thompson, right? Mr. Taylor mentioned you might be a problem. Henry stood straight, looking directly at the guard. That farm is my home. I'm not selling. You will, the guard said with a smirk. One way or another. Lisa had managed to slip her memory card into her pocket, replacing it with an empty one. She allowed the first guard to take her camera. Hey, she protested, playing her part. That's private property. So is this land, the guard replied, removing the memory card and dropping it on the ground. He stepped on it, crushing the plastic case. Oops. You can't do that, Lisa argued. I'm a reporter for the Burlington Herald. The guards exchanged a worried glance. A reporter? The taller guard looked less confident now. Nobody said anything about reporters. What are you hiding here? Lisa pressed, gesturing toward the chemical barrels. Those look like hazardous materials stored improperly near a water source. You need to leave, now. The guard's tone became threatening. Before there's a real problem. As they retreated down the path, Lisa whispered, I got everything we need on the memory card in my pocket. Back at Henry's farm, they gathered in the kitchen to review the evidence. Lisa connected her backup camera to her laptop, displaying the photos she'd taken. The dam is definitely illegal, she explained. Vermont law protects natural waterways, especially those that serve multiple properties, and those chemical barrels are a serious violation of environmental regulations. What happens now? Henry asked. I'll write the article. With these photos and the water test results, we'll have solid evidence of Westland's violations. Lisa looked at them both. But I should warn you, when this story breaks, Westland will know who helped me. There could be retaliation. We're already being harassed, Jack pointed out. At least this way we're fighting back. When will the story be published? Henry asked. Give me 3 days, Lisa replied. I'll need to get these water samples tested and verify some facts about Westland's permits. The article should run by Friday. 3 tense days followed. Henry and Jack took turns watching over their properties at night, worried about further vandalism. The creek continued to dry up, forcing them to haul water for the horses from town. On Friday morning, Jack arrived at Henry's farm with a copy of the Burlington Herald. The front page headline read, "Westland Enterprises Destroying Rural Vermont. Illegal water diversion and chemical dumping threatens farmland and wildlife." Lisa's article detailed how Westland had blocked natural waterways, improperly stored hazardous chemicals, and pressured local farmers to sell their land through intimidation tactics. The story included quotes from environmental experts and clear photos of the illegal dam and chemical barrels. "She did it," Jack said, spreading the newspaper on Henry's kitchen table. Before they could celebrate, Henry's phone rang. It was Richard Taylor from Westland. "You think you're clever, don't you?" Taylor's voice was cold with anger. "Going to the press with your lies." "They aren't lies," Henry replied calmly. "Your company built an illegal dam and stored chemicals where they don't belong. Lisa Chen just reported the facts." "You've made a powerful enemy, Thompson. You and Miller both. Westland doesn't take kindly to interference." "Is that a threat?" Henry asked. "Let's call it a promise," Taylor said before hanging up. Later that morning, 3 official vehicles arrived at the illegal dam site. One from the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation, one from the County Sheriff's Office, and one from the State Attorney General's office. Officials in uniforms and suits examined the dam and took their own samples and photographs. By afternoon, news vans from Burlington and even Boston had arrived in Oak Ridge. Reporters interviewed local farmers about Westland's pressure tactics. Environmental groups organized protesters who gathered at Westland's local office with signs reading "Water is life" and "Stop Westland now." Lisa Chen returned to Henry's farm that evening, looking tired but triumphant. "The state has ordered Westland to remove the dam immediately," she told them. "The EPA is investigating the chemical barrels, and the Attorney General's office is looking into the harassment complaints." "Will it be enough to stop them?" Henry asked. "Too soon to tell," Lisa admitted. "Westland has powerful lawyers and lots of money, but they hate bad publicity. This scandal has already caused their stock price to drop." The next morning, a crowd gathered at the town hall for an emergency meeting called by the mayor. Henry, Jack, and Lisa sat in the front row as Mayor Wilson addressed the packed room. "As many of you have read in the Herald, Westland Enterprises has violated numerous environmental laws in our town," the mayor began. "State authorities are investigating, and I've invited Westland to send a representative to address these serious accusations." Richard Taylor walked to the podium, his usual confident smile replaced by a tight-lipped frown. "Westland categorically denies any wrongdoing," he stated. "The dam was built with proper permits, and the chemical storage meets all regulations. This is simply a case of a few disgruntled landowners spreading misinformation because they want more money for their properties." Angry murmurs spread through the crowd. "That's a lie," shouted Bill Parker, who had sold his farm to Westland. "You told me the resort would bring jobs to Oak Ridge. You never mentioned damming up creeks or storing chemicals." Others joined in, voicing their concerns and anger. Many who had sold their land now expressed regret and feelings of betrayal. When Taylor tried to continue, the crowd grew louder, drowning out his words. Finally, the mayor stepped in. "I think we've heard enough, Mr. Taylor. This meeting will reconvene after state authorities complete their investigation." As Taylor left the podium, he glared at Henry and Jack. "This isn't over," he muttered as he passed their seats. "No," Jack agreed quietly. "It's just beginning." The next day, state environmental officials arrived at the dam site with heavy equipment. By noon, workers had removed enough of the earthen barrier to allow water to flow downstream again. Henry and Jack stood watching as the creek bed slowly began to fill. "Look at that," Henry said, pointing to the returning water. "Already coming back." "The land knows how to heal itself when given a chance," Jack replied. News of the illegal dam spread quickly through Oak Ridge and neighboring towns. The Burlington Herald ran follow-up stories each day, with Lisa Chen reporting on new developments. State investigators found that Westland had falsified permit applications and bribed a local official to overlook violations. 1 week after the town hall meeting, Mayor Wilson called for another community gathering. This time, the town hall was so crowded that people stood along the walls and outside the open doors. "Folks," the mayor began, "we have a serious situation here in Oak Ridge. Westland Enterprises has purchased nearly 60% of our farmland, much of it through questionable tactics. Now we've learned they've broken environmental laws and threatened residents who refuse to sell. Angry voices rose from the crowd. Many who had sold their land to Westland now felt deceived. "I sold because they said the resort would bring jobs," called out Susan Jenkins, who had owned 20 acres on the north side of town. "Nobody said anything about destroying our water supply." "They told me the golf course would preserve the natural beauty," added Frank Miller, another former farm owner. "Instead, they're cutting down all the old trees and reshaping the hills with bulldozers." The mayor raised his hands for quiet. "I've invited representatives from the Vermont Land Trust to speak tonight. They have a proposal that might help protect what's left of our agricultural community." A woman in her 50s stepped to the podium. "I'm Patricia Gardner from the Vermont Land Trust. What's happening in Oak Ridge follows a pattern we've seen in other rural communities. Large development companies buy farmland piece by piece, then change the character of the entire area." She displayed a map showing how much of Oak Ridge Westland now owned. Red-colored areas covered most of the town. "Once they own enough land," she continued, "they push for zoning changes that allow them to build whatever they want, regardless of the impact on the community, water resources, or wildlife." Henry listened intently from his seat in the third row. Jack sat beside him, taking notes. "What can we do?" someone called from the crowd. "They already own most of the town." Patricia nodded. "That's why I'm here. Vermont law allows communities to establish agricultural protection zones, areas where farmland is legally protected from development. Even if sold, the land must remain agricultural." Murmurs of interest spread through the room. "But for that to work," Patricia continued, "we need landowners willing to put their properties into the protection zone. It means giving up the right to sell to developers in the future." The room grew quiet as people considered what this would mean. For many farmers, their land was their retirement plan. Giving up the right to sell to developers could mean accepting much lower property values. Mayor Wilson stepped forward again. "Before we discuss this further, I've asked Henry Thompson to say a few words. Henry's farm has been in his family for 3 generations, and he's one of the few who refused to sell to Westland." Henry hadn't expected to speak. He slowly stood up, feeling everyone's eyes on him. He cleared his throat and walked to the podium. "I'm not much for public speaking," he began, "but I know something about this land. My grandfather cleared these fields. My father built our barn with his own hands. I was born in the same house where I live today." The room was silent as Henry spoke. "6 months ago, I almost lost everything. My horse Spirit was badly injured. I couldn't afford the surgery he needed. I had to sell him, and I thought that was the end." Henry paused, his voice growing stronger. "But sometimes what looks like an ending is actually a beginning." He gestured toward Jack. "Jack Miller bought Spirit for $50, all he had at the time. He took Spirit away to heal him, then brought him back. Not only that, but he built a rehabilitation center next to my farm. He could have gone anywhere, built it anywhere, but he chose Oak Ridge." Henry looked around the room at his neighbors' faces. "When Westland offered me 3 times what my farm is worth, I turned them down. Not because I'm rich. I'm not. I turned them down because some things matter more than money. This land isn't just dirt and grass. It's our history, our community, our future." Several people nodded in agreement. "I understand why many of you sold," Henry continued. "Farming is hard work with little reward. But now we have a chance to protect what's left. I'm putting my farm into this protection zone, and I hope others will join me." As Henry returned to his seat, the room erupted in applause. Jack patted him on the shoulder. "Well said," Jack whispered. Patricia Gardner returned to the podium. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Now I'd like to explain exactly how the agricultural protection zone would work." For the next hour, Patricia outlined the legal process. Landowners would sign agreements restricting future use of their property to agricultural purposes. In exchange, they would receive tax benefits and access to conservation grants. The zone would need at least 10 participating farms to be legally established. When she finished, the mayor opened the floor for questions. "What about those of us who already sold to Westland?" asked Bill Parker. "Is it too late for our land?" "Unfortunately, yes," Patricia confirmed. "Once the land is sold, the previous owner can't restrict its use." "Unless Westland agrees to sell it back," Jack pointed out. "Or if the sales were based on fraudulent claims, they might be invalidated." That sparked intense discussion throughout the room. Many who had sold to Westland now regretted their decision and wanted to know if they could undo the sales. By the end of the meeting, 8 farmers had committed to placing their land in the protection zone. Henry's farm and Jack's rehabilitation center were the largest properties involved. "We need 2 more," the mayor announced. "Anyone else?" From the back of the room, an elderly woman stood up. Martha Johnson, 84 years old, was Oak Ridge's oldest resident. "I own 10 acres on Creek Road," she said. "Been in my family since 1870. Put it in your protection zone. Westland's been calling me every day, but I won't sell to those crooks." The crowd applauded as Martha's name was added to the list. "That's 9, the mayor said. "We need 1 more." The room fell silent. Most of the remaining landowners looked uncertain. Then the door opened, and a tall man in his 40s entered. Henry felt a shock of recognition. "David?" he said in disbelief. David Thompson walked to the front of the room. "Sorry I'm late. Flight from California was delayed." Henry stood and embraced his son. "What are you doing here?" "Lisa Chen called me," David explained. "Told me what was happening. I've been following the news articles online." He turned to address the crowd. "I'm David Thompson, Henry's son. I've spent the last 20 years in California thinking there was nothing for me here in Oak Ridge. I was wrong." David looked at his father. "Dad, I know you and I haven't always seen eye to eye about the farm, but after hearing what Westland is trying to do, I realized something important. That land isn't just yours, it's our family's legacy." He faced the mayor. "I own 20 acres on the south side of town, inherited it from my mother's family, put it in the protection zone. That makes 10 properties," Patricia Gardner announced. "Enough to establish the Oak Ridge Agricultural Protection Zone." The meeting ended with a new sense of purpose. The mayor formed committees to handle legal paperwork, coordinate with state officials, and develop plans for rebuilding the community. As people filed out, many stopped to shake Henry's hand or pat him on the back. After years of feeling increasingly isolated, Henry suddenly found himself at the center of a community coming together. "You started something important here, Dad," David said as they walked to Henry's truck. "I'm proud of you." "I'm glad you're here, son," Henry replied. "But what about your job in California?" "I can work remotely for a few weeks," David explained. "Lisa's articles got me thinking about home again. I wanted to see this place through adult eyes, not just as the farm I couldn't wait to escape from as a teenager." The next morning, Henry took David to meet Spirit and see the rehabilitation center. Spirit recognized David immediately, though they hadn't seen each other in years. "He remembers me," David said in amazement as the horse gently nudged his shoulder. "Horses never forget the people who were kind to them," Jack explained, joining them at the paddock fence. David was impressed by the rehabilitation center. "This is incredible," he said, watching a therapy session in the water tank. "Nothing like this existed when I was growing up here." Over the next few days, something remarkable happened in Oak Ridge. People began showing up at Spirit's Haven offering to help. Tom Carter brought his tractor to help clear additional paddock space. Sarah Collins, the veterinarian, offered free checkups for all the horses. Even Bill Wilson from the hardware store arrived with donated supplies for building new stalls. "What's happening?" Henry asked Jack as they watched volunteers unloading lumber from a truck. "Community," Jack replied simply. "The protection zone has given people a purpose. They want to build something that will last." On Saturday, Lisa Chen published another front-page article. "Rural Vermont Town Fights Back. Oak Ridge Creates Agricultural Protection Zone to Preserve Farmland." The story detailed how the community had united against Westland's tactics and created legal protection for their remaining farms. That same day, David surprised Henry by announcing that his wife and children would be arriving from California the following week. "They want to see the farm," David explained. "My kids have never met their cousins here in Vermont." "The house needs cleaning," Henry worried. "And repairs?" "Already handled," David interrupted. "Look." He pointed to where several pickup trucks were pulling into the driveway. Neighbors poured out, carrying tools, paint, and building materials. "Tom organized a work party," David explained. "They're going to help get the farmhouse ready for visitors." Henry watched in amazement as friends and neighbors, many he barely spoke to anymore, began working on his house. Some scraped and painted the peeling clapboards. Others replaced broken roof shingles. 2 men installed a new water heater in the basement. "Why are they doing this?" Henry asked Tom. Because you stood up when it mattered, Tom replied. You reminded us all what community means. By sundown, Henry's farmhouse looked better than it had in 20 years. Fresh white paint gleamed in the evening light. The sagging porch had been straightened and reinforced. New window screens replaced the torn ones Henry had patched with duct tape. As the volunteers gathered in the yard for a well-deserved dinner of grilled hamburgers and potato salad, Henry felt a strange sensation in his chest, a warmth he hadn't experienced since before Margaret died. It wasn't just his farm that was being restored. It was his connection to the place and people he had known all his life. 1 year after Spirit's return, a large white tent stood in the field between Henry's farm and the rehabilitation center. Colorful banners reading Grand Opening Spirits Haven Equine Rehabilitation Center fluttered in the gentle summer breeze. Rows of folding chairs faced a small wooden platform where Jack, Henry, and Mayor Wilson waited to address the crowd. Nearly 200 people had gathered for the celebration. Some were local farmers, others were veterinarians, horse owners, and reporters from across Vermont. In the front row sat Henry's family, David and his wife Karen, their 3 children, and Henry's daughter Lisa, who had flown in from California for the occasion. Never thought I'd see this day, Henry whispered to Jack as Mayor Wilson stepped forward to begin the ceremony. Folks, thank you all for coming, the mayor began. Today marks a special milestone for Oak Ridge. 1 year ago, our town faced a crisis. A big corporation wanted to turn our farmland into golf courses and hotels. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the audience. Thanks to brave people like Henry Thompson and Jack Miller, we stood together and protected our way of life. The Oak Ridge Agricultural Protection Zone now covers 15 farms and over 600 acres of land. This land will remain farmland forever, no matter who owns it. The crowd applauded enthusiastically. And now, the mayor continued, I'm proud to officially open Spirits Haven, a place where injured horses can heal and recover, just like our community has done. Jack stepped forward next. He looked different than he had a year ago, more confident, his face tanned from working outdoors. He wore a clean button-up shirt for the occasion, but still had on his usual worn jeans and boots. Thank you all for coming today, Jack said. When I bought the Johnson property, I had a simple dream, to create a place where injured horses could get the care they need. What happened next was bigger than anything I imagined. He gestured toward the newly renovated facilities behind him. The old Johnson barn had been transformed into a modern treatment center with specialized stalls, a water therapy pool, and exercise areas. New paddocks with white fencing stretched across the formerly empty fields. A small office building connected to the barn housed medical equipment and a reception area. Spirits Haven is more than a business, Jack continued. It's a promise that every horse deserves a second chance. Already, we've successfully rehabilitated 17 horses that other facilities had given up on. The crowd clapped as Jack stepped back and introduced Henry. Henry stood slowly, his arthritic knee still troubling him on cool mornings, though today's warmth made movement easier. He looked out at the gathered faces, friends, neighbors, family members, and felt momentarily overwhelmed. I'm not much for speeches, he began, but I want to tell you about a horse named Spirit. Henry recounted how close he had come to losing everything, his beloved horse, his family farm, his purpose in life. He told them how Spirit's injury had seemed like the final blow in a series of hardships. When I sold Spirit for $50, I thought it was the end, Henry said, his voice strong despite his age. Turned out it was just the beginning. One act of kindness changed everything. He looked toward the nearest paddock where Spirit stood watching the proceedings, his spotted coat gleaming in the sunlight. Sometimes when you have almost nothing left to give, Henry concluded, that's when life surprises you the most. After the speeches, guests explored the new facilities. Jack led tours of the treatment areas while Henry showed visitors the special paddock designed for children's therapy sessions. In a small grassy area, Spirit gave gentle rides to children, including Henry's grandchildren. He's so good with the kids, Karen, David's wife, remarked as she watched her youngest daughter laughing atop Spirit's back. She's usually terrified of large animals. Spirit has a way of knowing what each person needs, Henry explained. That's why he's perfect as our therapy horse. The celebration continued into the afternoon. A local band played folk music while people enjoyed a barbecue lunch. Henry moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and good wishes from neighbors who had once feared he might lose his farm. Sarah Collins, the veterinarian, stopped Henry to chat. "I can hardly believe this is the same place," she said. "Remember when you couldn't afford Spirit surgery? Now you're helping horses from all over the state." "Never could have done it without Jack," Henry said, looking across the field where Jack was demonstrating water therapy techniques to a group of interested veterinarians. Later, as the party was winding down, Lisa Chen arrived with her photographer. Her articles about Westland Enterprises had led to a major investigation and eventually forced the company to abandon its plans in Oak Ridge. "Sorry I'm late," Lisa said. "Just got back from Boston. Westland's CEO was indicted on bribery charges this morning." "Really?" Henry was surprised. Lisa nodded. "Once investigators started digging into their business practices, they found corruption everywhere. The company's stock has dropped so much they're talking about bankruptcy." "What about Richard Taylor?" Jack asked, joining the conversation. "Turned state's evidence," Lisa replied. "He's testifying against his bosses in exchange for a lighter sentence." The news quickly spread through the remaining guests. For the farmers who had fought against Westland, it felt like final vindication. As evening approached, the celebration ended. Guests departed, carrying home pieces of cake and warm memories. Workers began dismantling the tent and cleaning up. Henry's family returned to the freshly renovated farmhouse, which now had a new kitchen and updated bathrooms thanks to David's investment. "Dad," David said as they walked back to the house, "Karen and I have been talking. We're thinking of moving back to Vermont permanently." Henry stopped walking. "What about your job in California?" "I can work remotely most of the time," David explained. "And honestly, after seeing how the kids love it here, the space, the freedom, the connection to nature, we want them to experience that growing up." Henry felt a surge of emotion he couldn't quite name. "You'd move back here, after all these years?" "If that's okay with you," David said. "We thought we might build a house on the South Field. That way we'd be close but still have our own space." Henry nodded, not trusting his voice for a moment. Then he said simply, "I'd like that very much." Later that evening, after everyone else had gone home or turned in for the night, Henry sat on the porch of his new home, a comfortable cottage Jack had built for him on the edge of the rehabilitation center property. From his rocking chair, he could see both his original farmhouse where David's family was staying and the renovated barn where injured horses were receiving evening treatments. Jack joined him, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Quite a day," Jack said, handing Henry a cup. "Never thought I'd see anything like it," Henry agreed. 10 new horses scheduled for rehabilitation next month. David and his family moving back, the farm protected forever by the conservation agreement. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the sunset paint the fields in golden light. "I've been meaning to ask you something," Henry said finally. "That day you came back with Spirit. Why did you really do it? You spent thousands of dollars healing him. You could have kept him or sold him for good money once he was healthy again." Jack took a sip of coffee before answering. "When my riding career ended, I lost more than just my ability to compete. I lost my purpose, my confidence. During my recovery, someone told me I'd never be useful again." Henry listened attentively. In all their time working together, Jack rarely spoke about his past. "When I saw you and Spirit that first day," Jack continued, "I recognized something. You both had such dignity, even in a desperate situation. I wanted to help, but I only had $50 to my name that day." "So you took Spirit and healed him," Henry said. "Yes, but it was more than that. Helping Spirit helped me find my purpose again, and bringing him back to you, that was completing the circle. Everyone deserves a second chance, Henry. Horses, humans, all of us." As they talked, Spirit appeared at the fence line of the nearest paddock. The horse watched them for a moment, then turned and trotted away across the field, his movements fluid and graceful in the evening light. "Let's go watch him run," Henry suggested, setting down his coffee. The 2 men walked to the paddock fence. Spirit saw them coming and picked up his pace, galloping now in wide, joyful circles around the field. His spotted coat caught the last rays of sunlight, and his mane flew behind him like a banner. "Look at him go," Henry said softly. "Hard to believe he was ever injured." "Some hurts leave scars," Jack replied, "but they don't have to limit us." Spirit completed one final circuit of the field, then trotted over to where they stood. He pushed his nose against Henry's shoulder in his familiar greeting. "Hello, old friend," Henry said, stroking the horse's neck. You've had quite a journey, haven't you? Spirit nickered softly in response, his eyes bright and intelligent. As darkness settled over the farm, lights came on in the rehabilitation center where night staff tended to the injured horses. In Henry's farmhouse, his grandchildren were getting ready for bed, their excited voices carrying faintly across the field. From town came the distant sound of the church bell ringing 8 times. Henry looked around at everything that had grown from one simple act of kindness. A stranger buying an injured horse for $50, the rehabilitation center, the protected farmland, his family returning home, a community healing and coming together. Sometimes, Henry said quietly, what seems like the end is really just the beginning. Spirit snorted softly, as if in agreement, and the 3 of them, man, horse, and healer, stood together in the gathering darkness, watching as stars began to appear in the Vermont sky.